Hey, hello, everybody. I'm Sylvia Hanna. I am the Vice President and Head of Medical Affairs at Avalo Therapeutics. If you have done your research, you may have known us as Cerecor. So last week we changed our name and our NASDAQ ticker. So we are now Avalo Therapeutics and no longer Cerecor. But we are still investigating an IL-18 monoclonal antibody for Still's disease. So that has not changed. So we're a small biopharmaceutical company. We have 6 molecules that we are investigating in different rare disease, oncology, and immunology diseases. So we're small and nimble and mighty. We are driven by compassion and innovation in order to bring targeted therapies to patients in the immunology, oncology, and rare genetic disorders in those patients. So and our development approach is really to look at predictive markers, and one of them is IL-18, as you've heard Rashmi and Jeanette speak about. And so right now we're doing clinical proof of concept. We're trying to prove that it actually works and then do larger trials. So that's where we are in the process. So today we're going to talk about Still's disease, as Rashmi has said, SJIA and Still's, same disease, different age groups. We'll talk about the correlation between IL-18 and Still's. We'll talk about our molecule that the drug doesn't have a name yet. It has letters and numbers. So it's ATVX, which is Avalo Therapeutics 007. So, all right. So as we know, adult onset Still's is a rare and not a very well understood disease. We're still learning a lot. It's in the United States, the estimates are 3,500 to 7,000, Western Europe, 3,400 to 6,900, and in Japan, 1,400 to 2,700. So there's no definitive genetic or infectious cause, and about 40% of patients suffer from severe chronic disease. And unfortunately, the treatment options aren't wonderful. There's NSAIDs, your typical over-the-counter non-steroidals, your Advil, your ibuprofen, Motrin, steroids, and then immunosuppressants, disease-modifying agents like methotrexate. And up and coming, we have monoclonal antibodies and proteins, anti-IL-1, anti-IL-6, and hopefully anti-IL-18. And as Rashmi, I really liked her slide with the garbage can. It is a diagnosis of exclusion. We haven't made much progress there. So basically, you have to have a negative ANA, rule out systemic lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. And when you've discarded all the other diseases, then you can be diagnosed with Still's, which is not a great way to diagnose a disease. There's an equal distribution between sexes. So some diseases, more women will be affected, more men will be affected, but here it's pretty equal. And then the age presentation is variable depending on whether, if you're pediatric, you'll get diagnosed with SJIA. So we talked a little bit about current treatments. And so initially, most patients are started with NSAIDs and steroid treatments, and there are some short-term and long-term side effects with these treatments. And then for patients that don't have any sort of improvement of their symptoms, they're called refractory patients. They are patients with a disease or condition that doesn't respond to treatment. Then you have the stronger drugs. So those disease-modifying agents like methotrexate or IL-1, IL-1 beta, IL-6, and anti-TNF antibodies, which we've heard people talk about today. And here are some of the names of the drugs that are currently used. So, and what's very, very important, as Jeanette said, you guys set me up really well, that patients have to be carefully monitored for the development of MAS, macrophage activation syndrome. And while many patients do derive at least partial benefit from some of these treatments, some patients remain refractory, they don't respond at all, or they'll partially respond, and they're called partially refractory. So here at Avalo Therapeutics, we believe there is a need for more targeted therapies. And so we're targeting IL-18. It's, as Rashmi has said, and Jeanette has led up to it, IL-18 has really shown a critical role in various anti-inflammatory diseases. So right now we are targeting Stills. And so if you take a look at this, it's a little similar to the figure that Rashmi presented. IL-18 correlates with Still's disease activity. So if you look at this, in this study, 38 patients were diagnosed with adult onset Still's disease, 20 patients with SJIA, and then they wanted to look at patients, they took 65 adults and 23 children who had fever and or arthritis, but didn't meet the diagnosis for acute onset Still's or SJIA, and they served as their comparison group. And so if you look at the comparison group versus the patients that had the disease, you can see that IL-18 is almost 1,000-fold greater of elevated IL-18 serum levels. So we believe it's a significant and important biomarker in AOSD as well as SJIA. And so if we can find a biomarker, then hopefully we can try to decrease those IL-18 levels, and the disease hopefully your symptoms will decrease. That's the theory that we're using. So you can also find IL-18 in other inflammatory diseases because IL-18 is part of the inflammatory pathway. But again, unfortunately, AOSD has the highest. So compared to lupus or systemic sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis or healthy patients, you can see that the IL-18 levels are markedly higher in AOSD patients. So based on that, and then also very, very similar again in systemic juvenile idiopathic arthritis, SJIA. And so here we have the diagnosis prevalence, again, diagnosis of exclusion, and IL-18 are significantly elevated. So if you look at SJIA active disease, and then patients with partial remission and patients with remission, you can see that when IL-18 goes down, so do the symptoms. And then these are our comparator groups. So monoclonal antibodies. Since we were in the middle of a pandemic still, we've heard a little bit about monoclonal antibodies. And what are they? Well, they're a type of medical treatment, and they're made in the lab, and they work like natural antibodies in your body to help you fight the illness. So it's been used in COVID, and we're looking to use it in Stills. So originally, AVTX-007, it will be the first in class anti-IL-18 monoclonal antibody. So it'll be the first. And it was originally developed by MedImmune and AstraZeneca, originally tested in patients with COPD. So chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, another inflammatory disease. And so I'm just showing this slide to show how initially when you're developing a drug, you have to figure out the appropriate dosage. So if the dose is too low, it may not be effective. If the dose is too high, you can have some safety concerns. So you have to figure out the appropriate dose in order to be able to give this to the patients. So here we were looking for an appropriate dose, and you can see that placebo is no drug, so that's up here. So obviously the IL-18 levels stayed high, whereas over here, 300 milligrams IV and 1,000 milligrams IV were the two groups. In those patients, you can see that the IL-18 dropped significantly. So, and IL-18 so far in our studies shows that it's pretty well tolerated. You don't really have serious side effects. Patients don't have side effects that lead to discontinuation of the study where they say, I can't take it anymore. I don't want to be on the drug. Obviously, patients can withdraw from study whenever they want. And then the ones that did have side effects, they were mild to moderate. One of them was worsening COPD, which is that's considered a side effect if your disease gets worse. The most frequent side effects, pretty common in most drugs, headache, worsening COPD, dizziness, very common, cough. If you have COPD, that's associated with cough, and then a slower than normal heart rate. Okay, so our study will be, again, if the study is successful, this will potentially be the first IL-18 monoclonal antibody. And so our study is in subjects with active onset Still's disease, and we're evaluating two doses, the two doses that I discussed. and it's in US and Europe. And so the primary endpoint is we're looking to reduce CRP, which is another biomarker. It's C-reactive protein. And we want to be able to see in lab data that this has been decreased by at least 50%. And we also want to see elimination of fever for greater than 48 hours. So that's how we would know that the study is successful. When the FDA evaluates studies, you have a primary endpoint, and if those patients reach this endpoint, then the FDA will say, your study was successful, we will approve the drug. And then there are usually some key secondary exploratory endpoints. And again, more lab data, change in IL levels, and obviously safety and tolerability. Is the drug safe? Even if a drug works, if you have safety concerns, then the drug will not get approved. So all of these things have to be met in order for the drug to be approved. And we are anticipating some initial data in fall of 2021. So we're very excited about this. And for more information, and I know that Tiffany has posted it on the website as well, you can speak to your physician if this clinical trial is appropriate for you and get more information at clinicaltrials.gov.